By early 1967, the U.S. Army faced a growing dilemma in Vietnam. The enemy seemed to vanish into the thick jungle within minutes, leaving behind only silence and confusion. Standard methods of reconnaissance were failing. Ground patrols moved too slowly, often walking straight into ambushes. Aerial observation from high altitude couldn't penetrate the dense canopy, leaving commanders blind to what hid beneath. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army used the landscape as their ally, slipping through terrain they knew better than anyone. American units needed an entirely new approach, something fast, flexible, and able to find an invisible enemy without losing more men in the process. Helicopters were supposed to fill that gap, but most existing models were too large, too loud, or too sluggish to effectively scout the jungle. Pilots flying over suspected areas couldn't get close enough to see meaningful details. Ground troops below continued to take casualties from foes they never saw. The traditional playbook wasn't working anymore. Then, out of the frustration and chaos, a radical idea began to form, one that would change how the war was fought from the air. What if the Army paired two helicopters together, each built for a specific role? A smaller, agile scout could fly low, find the enemy, and mark their position, while a heavier, faster gunship circled above, ready to unleash devastating firepower. It sounded reckless, almost suicidal. But to the young pilots watching their comrades fall into unseen traps, it also made perfect sense. The plan relied on baiting the enemy to shoot first, revealing their hidden positions. What followed would be swift and punishing. The concept wasn't entirely new. Helicopters had cooperated before, but never with this level of coordination and intent. This time, the entire mission was designed around drawing enemy fire, something no pilot had ever been ordered to do deliberately. It would require absolute trust between the two aircraft, near-instant communication, and nerves of steel. Yet, as the war intensified, desperate measures didn't seem so far-fetched. By late 1967, two aircraft stood ready to make this experiment a reality. The Hughes OH-6 Cayuse, a small bubble-shaped observation helicopter of the Army called the Loach, and the Bell AH-1G Cobra, America's first true attack helicopter. One was small and nimble, the other sleek and lethal. Together, they would form what came to be known as the hunter-killer team, a pairing where danger wasn't avoided, but deliberately invited. These twin machines were about to redefine what it meant to fly into combat, turning survival itself into a calculated ARTAS. The first Loaches touched down in Vietnam that December. No one could predict how this unorthodox partnership between a fragile scout and a heavily armed guardian would forever change the face of helicopter warfare. That end December 1967. The first OH-6 Cayuse helicopters arrived in Vietnam. To many who saw it for the first time, it looked more like a toy than a weapon of war. The aircraft's rounded fuselage and compact frame gave it a deceptively friendly appearance. But underneath that light frame sat a 285-horsepower Allison engine capable of propelling it through the air at surprising speeds. It weighed less than a Volkswagen Beetle, yet could dive through jungle gaps where no other helicopter dared to go. Soldiers quickly gave it a new name, drawn from its Army designation, LOH, for Light Observation Helicopter. Spoken out loud, it became Loach, a nickname that would stick through every story that followed. Its small size and curved shell weren't aesthetic quirks. They were lifelines. The rounded fuselage absorbed impact better than conventional airframes, protecting the crew when things went wrong, which they often did. With a 26-foot rotor and no hydraulic system to fail, the Loach was simple, tough, and surprisingly forgiving. It could fly just 10 feet above the treetops, weaving between branches at speeds of 45 to 60 miles per hour. From that altitude, pilots could see details on the ground that no satellite or spy plane could ever capture. Just months earlier, in August 1967, another machine had touched down on the same soil, the Bell AH-1G Cobra. If the Loach was the scout, the Cobra was the sword. Sleek and narrow, it was the first helicopter purpose-built for attack. The pilot sat behind and above the gunner, both encased in a tandem cockpit designed to reduce drag and silhouette. Beneath its slender frame, the Cobra carried a staggering arsenal. Twin miniguns that could spit 4,000 rounds per minute, 40mm grenade launchers, and rocket pods capable of unleashing up to 76 rockets in a single pass. By early 1968, these two aircraft began flying side by side. The concept worked almost instinctively. The Loach would sweep low, searching for enemy movement, while the Cobra orbited 1,500 feet above, ready to rain down fire the moment the scout drew attention. The Army called them pink teams, white for scouts, red for gunships, and pink when they flew as one. What started as an experiment was quickly becoming doctrine. This was more than innovation. It was desperation refined into strategy. Young American pilots, barely out of flight school, were about to fly missions where survival depended on reflex, teamwork, and raw nerve. The hunter-killer partnership was no longer an idea. It was now airborne. And the enemy was about to find out how dangerous curiosity could be by the time these teenage pilots took the skies. The Army's new tactic had become a deadly dance of bait and strike, one that would test every ounce of courage they possessed. When the hunter-killer teams became operational, there was little time to be selective about who flew them. The Army needed pilots fast. Most Loach crews were barely 19, young men who had just finished flight school and suddenly found themselves in the most dangerous job in Vietnam. Training was short and unforgiving. A scout pilot got about 10 hours of practice in the OH-6 before being declared ready for combat. 10 hours. That was all it took to move from classroom theory to flying 10 feet above enemy territory. The logic was simple. The Loach was easy to fly, and Vietnam would teach the rest. Door gunners had even less preparation. Sometimes they received only a single day of instruction before being strapped into the left seat with an M60 machine gun. They were told what to expect, but nothing could truly prepare them for the first time bullets tore through the thin aluminum skin beside them. It was learning by doing, in the most literal and lethal way possible. The Army didn't assign these missions to the cautious or the calculated. Youth, inexperience, and sheer reflex often proved more valuable than restraint. These pilots hadn't yet learned fear the way older men had, and that made them perfect for a job where hesitation could mean death. Most didn't have families waiting at home, and in a war of numbers, that mattered to commanders trying to justify the risk. A typical mission began at dawn. Crews gathered in briefing tents to study hand-drawn maps marked with suspected enemy trails or recent reports from infantry patrols. Then the Loach lifted off, skimming the jungle canopy, the door gunner leaning out to scan the undergrowth sliding past just feet below. The tactic was painfully simple. Fly low, fly slow, and make yourself visible. If someone opened fire, you'd found what you're looking for. They called it reconnaissance by fire. But to the pilots, it was simply hunting. The Cobra circled high above, watching for the telltale flash of muzzle fire. When the jungle suddenly erupted, the Loach crew would pop colored smoke red, yellow, or purple to mark the spot, then pull away hard while the Cobra dove in like a predator. Miniguns roared, rockets streaked, and the trilene vanished in flame. In seconds, an unseen ambush became a smoking crater. It was brutal, effective, and terrifying all at once. Every mission carried the same rule: draw fire, survive it, and clear the path for others. But as these young pilots discovered, the real danger wasn't just in being shot at. It was in what they began to see, feel, and sense in the jungle that no one else could. After those first weeks of chaos and near misses, something remarkable began to happen. The Loach crews who survived started noticing things no manual had ever mentioned. Day after day, flying the same stretches of jungle, they began to read the terrain the way a hunter reads the ground. Door gunners, perched with their boots hanging just above the trees, developed the sharpest eyes in Vietnam. They could tell how fresh a set of footprints was by the color of the mud, whether a trail had been used that morning or the night before by how damp the grass still looked. Pilots learned to sense the jungle's rhythm. They spotted subtle breaks in foliage, faint smoke from half-extinguished fires, or a patch of vegetation that looked too perfect to be natural. Signs that a bunker or tunnel mouth lay beneath. Some even claimed they could smell the fish sauce North Vietnamese troops carried, or the distinct wood smoke of their cooking fires. True or not, these instincts became the difference between life and death. The more they flew, the more the missions began to feel almost supernatural. Many pilots swore they could sense danger seconds before it appeared, banking away an instant before gunfire erupted from the trees. Door gunners learned to trust those instincts without question. A slight hesitation or wrong angle could mean never making it home. By mid-1969, these young Americans had become the Army's most effective hunters. Infantry units on the ground started requesting hunter-killer teams by name. They could spot camouflaged supply caches or enemy camps that months of ground reconnaissance had missed. Every mission added new knowledge, tiny cues that couldn't be taught in flight school, but saved lives on every sortie. Something else changed too. The bond between Loach and Cobra crews deepened beyond words. They began to fly like extensions of each other, two halves of a single organism moving through the sky. After hundreds of missions, they could communicate with a tilt of the rotors or a clipped radio phrase. The trust was absolute. When the Loach went low, the Cobra was already poised above, weapons armed, waiting for the first wisp of colored smoke. Off duty, they lived and breathed as one team, eating together, arguing, joking, replaying every detail of the day's flight. What started as a tactic had evolved into brotherhood, forged in the constant exchange of danger and rescue. But as that brotherhood grew, so did the grim reality, because by 1969, the numbers told a truth everyone tried not to think about. Loach pilots were running out of time to be by late 1969. The statistics had become impossible to ignore. Scout pilots in the hunter-killer teams had an average life expectancy of just 6 months. Every Loach crew knew those odds, yet they climbed into their helicopters each morning without hesitation. The mission came first: find the enemy before the enemy found them. Courage wasn't a matter of choice anymore, it was routine. Some pilots managed to survive longer than anyone believed possible. Warrant Officer Clyde Romero flew missions for months and was shot down 9 times, each crash ending with twisted metal and smoke, but somehow he always walked away. Hugh Mills, another scout legend, survived 16 crashes, each one a near-death escape that turned him into a living myth among aircrews. It wasn't luck alone, training instinct, and that curved fuselage design of the OH-6 saved more lives than anyone could count. That egg-shaped body, which had once drawn laughter, proved to be the Loach's armor. It absorbed impact and shielded the crew when the helicopter slammed into the jungle floor. Many pilots learned to control their own crashes, guiding crippled aircraft into small clearings with astonishing precision. Stories circulated through the ranks, like the one about a particular Loach called Queer John, which took 61 confirmed hits and survived 7 crashes without losing a single crew member. By the time it was retired, its frame was a patchwork of bullet holes and welds, but its legend gave every new pilot a reason to believe survival was still possible. Yet the overall cost was staggering. Of the 1,419 Loaches built for Vietnam, 842 were destroyed. Almost 60% of the fleet. Cobras fared little better, with nearly 300 of the 1,100 deployed lost to ground fire or accidents. Despite the grim toll, both crews kept flying. What kept them going wasn't denial, it was duty. Each successful flight meant fewer soldiers ambushed on the ground. Every enemy position found and destroyed saved lives. The young men behind those controls weren't chasing glory. They were trying to protect others, even as they faced impossible odds. That unspoken promise to shield the infantry below made it bearable to fly into danger day after day. And still, the jungle had one last evolution waiting for them, a new threat that would change everything about the way they flew. Because by 1972, the skies over Vietnam would no longer belong to daring pilots and their instincts. The enemy had brought a weapon that no amount of courage could outfly. By early 1972, the hunter-killer teams had been perfecting their deadly ballet for nearly 5 years. The tactics were sharp, the coordination flawless, and both sides understood the dance they were locked in. But in March that year, everything changed. North Vietnam launched the Easter Offensive, an assault unlike anything the Americans had seen before. It wasn't just an influx of troops and armor. This time, the enemy brought a new weapon from the Soviet Union, the SA-7 Grail. The SA-7 was a shoulder-fired, heat-seeking missile that homed in on a helicopter's engine exhaust. It was small, fast, and needed no radar guidance. For Loach crews flying barely above the treetops, it was a silent killer. There was no warning, no flash to spot, no chance to evade. One moment, the helicopter was sweeping over a clearing. The next, it was engulfed in fire, spinning into the canopy below. The first losses came quickly and without explanation. Crews who had survived hundreds of missions fell victim to weapons they never saw launched. Panic wasn't the right word, it was disbelief. For the first time, skill and reflex meant nothing. Commanders tried to adapt, ordering higher altitudes and faster flight paths, changing patrol patterns to confuse potential shooters. But against the SA-7, nothing worked. Its heat-seeking head didn't care about bravery or tactics. It simply hunted. Without the Loach flying low to draw fire, the entire hunter-killer system began to collapse. Cobras, too, were vulnerable at their standard 1,500-foot orbit, and soon the losses mounted. Some crews kept flying the old way out of pride and loyalty, refusing to let a new weapon dictate how they fought. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The era of low-level scouting was ending. By mid-1972, the Army quietly pulled back the Loach missions that had defined so many of its most daring pilots. It wasn't an official end. No memo or ceremony marked it, but the message was clear. The tactic that had once symbolized audacious courage had become suicide. What technology had given the hunter-killer teams the ability to find and strike with precision, technology had now taken away. After the war, the OH-6 lived on in new forms. The Little Bird helicopters used by modern special operations forces trace their lineage directly to the Loach, still flying dangerous missions that demand agility and trust. The Cobra, too, evolved into the twin-engine AH-1G Viper, carrying forward the spirit of its ancestors. But those who flew the original missions never forgot. They had faced impossible odds and forged a bond stronger than fear. The hunter-killer teams of Vietnam weren't just pilots and gunners. They were pioneers, teenagers who turned survival into strategy, and doing so changed the future of aerial warfare forever.